Egghead Hockey here. Today we'll be talking about the Canucks versus Wild series and what caused it to end the way it did. So basically this will be like a series review. And at the end, we'll do a special treat for making it to the end. I'll be doing the 3 stars of the series. So watch till the end if you want to see that. Anyways, going into the series, the Wild were slightly favored to win because they were better on the 5-on-5. But the series was filled with penalties and the Canucks were better on the power play. So when the penalties started to rack up, it seemed like the Canucks may have the upper hand. But neither team was too successful on the power play. They both scored quite a few power play goals, but for the amount of penalties that were handed out, there should have been way more power play goals. So despite penalties being handed out really often, it didn't really shift the tides in favor of the Canucks or the Wild. So neither team really had any evident upper hand. It was very close. So the series was overall going to be very tight. In Game 1, the Canucks lost 3-0. In this game, the Wild looked confident and the Canucks looked anything but. The Wild were simply more ready in this game. They came out on top and they were pretty steady and they just seemed playoff ready in this game. No one seemed to be nervous or shaky. And on the other hand, we had the Canucks. The Canucks seemed to be nervous and shaky in basically all ends of the ice. Our defensemen had the majority of the shots, which is not good. And even then, our star defenseman, Quinn Hughes, couldn't seem to get going, and he couldn't pick up the forwards' slack. The only players who really seemed to be locked in that game were Brock Boeser and Petey. And even then, Boeser wasn't that great, but he was much better than most of our guys in the game, and he just looked deadly, but he couldn't get shots off. We were playing too cute in that game, and that gave the Wild the upper hand. Jacob Markstrom, the Canucks star goaltender, did not look good either, and he was supposed to be a key point in this series, and he was very shaky as well. He let in some goals he maybe should have saved, and Game 1 was overall a very disappointing game for the Canucks, and it was a very promising performance for the Wild. In Game 2, the tide shifted a little bit. The series was looking like it was already in jeopardy after Game 1, which is pretty premature, and the Wild had heaps of momentum going into Game 2. But this time, the Canucks came ready. It seemed like the Wild were going to have the momentum, and it seemed like the Canucks might be down. But the Canucks came quickly out of the gate, and 24 seconds into the game, Tanner Pearson just simply didn't even make the cute play, just simply fired the puck at the net, and it ended up being a beautiful goal. This was a key energy moment. Despite it only being one goal, when you score early, it gives you some energy, and especially when it seems like things are not looking too good. The Canucks struggled with firing the puck at the net and not being too cute in Game 1, and the Wild were able to do this well in Game 1. And in Game 2, the Canucks were able to just fire the puck at the net. The Wild were able to punch back later in the period. They wouldn't score after a while after that, though. After the Wild's first goal, the Canucks went on to score 3 straight goals. This would prove to be crucial, as if they had one less goal, the game could have been completely different. The Wild scored 2 goals in the last 5 minutes, and like I mentioned, if the Canucks had one less goal, that would have been a tied game. And if the Wild had more time, that could have also been a tied game. But it still wasn't enough to tie up the game. And the Canucks, despite leading most of the game, barely came out with the win. In this game, it was pretty equal for the most part. The Canucks were able to break through more, but both teams had a lot of chances. The Canucks were a little bit better than the Wild in this game, but they broke down in the last little bit. And consistency was a big problem in this series, and the inconsistency sort of started here. And this always caused the Wild to come back. If they had more time, they probably would have tied the game up. Going into Game 3, neither team had too much momentum in their side. It was tied up, and the last game was very close. Game 3 was intense, and this game would be crucial as it would give one team the lead, and nobody scored until there were 6 minutes left in the second period. Both teams had a lot of chances, and the shots were pretty equal, but the Canucks capitalized on the power play, which is supposed to be their specialty, and the power play was something that actually had been pretty weak for the Canucks so far in the series, and the Wild had actually capitalized more on the power play at that point, but it was good to see the Canucks finally capitalize on the power play, and they broke the scoreless game. This game, at this point, had been very hard fought. The Canucks were very solid, and so were the Wild. But this goal may have been maybe too crushing for the Wild, as the Canucks went on to score 2 more goals in the third, and none of them were actually empty netters. So they were actually kind of, I guess you could say, legit goals. The shots still stayed pretty equal throughout the game, but the Canucks were able to break through on their chances, and this had a lot to do with goaltending. the Wild had weaker goaltending and Jacob Markstrom was stellar that night. And that's kind of what pushed the Canucks over to the side of winning. The next game was Game 4. This one would decide Minnesota's fate. They could be a part of the Lafreniere chase with a loss in Game 4, or they could be back in the series with a win. It was very intense for everyone, including the Canucks. Everyone expected Minnesota to come out hard, and everyone also expected the Canucks to come out hard, but maybe be a bit more nervous as they're a younger team. But some Canucks fans thought the Canucks would choke because, well, they're the Canucks and that's just kind of the way the luck goes for us. This game was very tense. Despite Vancouver having the momentum from 2-game winning streak and a shutout last game, there was no doubt that they were nervous and the fans were nervous. They came out of the gate hungry for a goal, and within the first couple of minutes, the Minnesota Wild did score. The Canucks struck back later in the first with a goal from Tanner Pearson, who seems to be getting quite a few early goals. But the Wild quickly responded to make it 2-1 for the Wild. In the second, the Wild would score in the first half and make it 3-1. After that goal, things were not looking good for the Vancouver Canucks. Their goaltender was not having his best night in a very big game, and the players had to pick up the slack. A few minutes later, the Canucks would grind away and get a response goal to make it 3-2 for the Wild, but it was still a closer game. And around a minute later, the Canucks would score on the power play, which was something that was key this series, and tie the game 3-3. But late in the second, the Wild would score a goal to make it 4-3 and tighten things up and make it a bit more intense for the Canucks again. This goal was not a good goal either. Markstrom left the hole and the puck slipped between him and the right post. It was basically a fluke, no offense Minnesota fans, and it was Markstrom's fault. It was 4-3 going into the third, and Minnesota had a power play. It was not looking great for Vancouver. Although they were playing well, their goaltender was not, and they need Markey to be a solid goaltender in order to actually go places, as their backups are not really ready for playoff hockey. And the D-men were forced to pick up the slack, and they sort of did. They shut down the Wild the whole period, and with less than 6 minutes left in the third, Bo Horvat one-timed a slot pass from Tanner Pearson to make it 4-4, and this goal would force it into overtime. In overtime, the Canucks quickly entered the zone, and Chris Tanev took a quick point shot to score 11 seconds into the overtime period to lift the Vancouver Canucks to the round of 16 teams. This series was very well fought, and I don't think there was really any big specific thing that caused the Wild to lose. I think the Canucks just had a couple more skilled forwards, and the Wild just didn't, and the Canucks had more firepower. And despite some aspects of the Canucks game being inconsistent, they were still able to beat the Wild. But it was still a very, very close series. Each team had one shutout win, and the rest of the games were won by one goal. Goaltending was supposed to be key in this series, and the goaltenders were both pretty inconsistent, so it ended up not being key. In both of the shutout games, the goaltenders were stellar, and in all the other games, they were not the strongest. Both teams were pretty equally matched, but the Canucks had more offensive firepower, and that's what sort of pushed them to victory. The Canucks have better goaltending, and the Wild have better defense, but the Canucks have better forwards and just better offensive firepower. The Canucks were slightly better than the Wild, and that's probably the main reason why they won. I can't really think of any other specific key reason because the Wild were pretty good in this series, and so were the Canucks, so it's pretty equal. So if you guys have any other opinions, tell me in the comments. And now, if you've made it this far into the video, you're actually going to get to hear my 3 stars of the series. And the 3rd star of the series was Elias Pettersson. He was being targeted and heavily pressured by the Wild, but he was still able to be one of our point leaders, and he was still able to battle through some very physical and cheap hits, and he didn't let his frustration out. He stayed persistent, and he was able to cash in 1 goal and 3 assists for 4 points in the series. The 2nd star of the series is Quinn Hughes. Hughes was very nervous in the beginning of the series, but he played well in all the other games, and he had 1 goal and 5 assists for 6 points, and he set the record for most points in a playoff series from a rookie defenseman in Canucks history, and he led the Canucks in points this series. The 1st star of the series was Kevin Fiala. Fiala was flying this series. He led the entire series with 3 goals, and he had a total of 4 points. He was easily the best Minnesota Wild player, and he had a point per game. And without him, this series would be completely different, and this team would be completely different. He was really good throughout the series, and despite him also being a defensive focus point for the Canucks, he was still able to break through 3 times and, like I mentioned, lead the whole series, the entire series that includes the Canucks, in goals. He looked dangerous whenever he was on the ice, and he was tough to contain with his speed and spectacular shot, and he looked like he was going to score every single shot he had. Thank you for watching until the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to help me reach 400 subscribers. We're so close. We're at 382, and every single sub helps out so much. Doesn't matter if we're reaching a goal or not. Just every sub means a lot and helps me out so much. Anyways, until next time, bye.